Okay, we're on the fifth step of the Eightfold Path. This is the projection step. So we were just talking about criteria, and we said that criteria should look at the outcomes that are produced by alternatives, but we really haven't talked about outcomes yet. So how do we figure out what the outcomes will be of each alternative policy? How do we project into the future and figure out what might happen?
Well,
And why is that important?
This is it's important because policy is about a society of the future. Maybe only next week or next year, but it's the future. And we all are trying to shape that society. That's what policy is trying to do. And so what's it going to be like, you know? And the future is inherently uncertain, and so you have to really get over a psychological barrier that you don't like uncertainty, you don't feel comfortable with it, the tools to deal with it are not always so great, you know. Crystal balls are not in fashion, really. Entrail reading is definitely out, if for no other reason. It's unkind to animals.
That's right.
But so you have to do this, and as I think in the book I say, you know, this is the hardest step. The most important advice is do it, because I find again and again the people, they go through the motions, but they don't really bear down and do it in a responsible way until you really rub their nose in it. There are some uncertainty is the key word here, and there are some techniques which can be used, you know, Monte Carlo analysis, and you know, people have dealt with this in a scientific and.
Why is Monte Carlo analysis important? What is that meant to deal with specifically that's important in projecting?
Well, it takes kind of the universe of all possible outcomes that you could get from a given intervention, and it sort of runs a computer simulation to get, you know, with random variables included as to what is the distribution of possible outcomes.
So it deals with uncertainty.
Absolutely,
It gives us a sense, and it pushes us to remember that uncertainty is something that's inevitable with any projection process.
Yeah, and you know, I guess the way to deal with this psychologically is to say, suppose somebody actually did what you're recommending, you know, and it flopped. Or worse yet, it had a terrible negative backlash effect. How would you feel that you were responsible for this?
Right.
You know, well, you don't want that to happen. You want things to work out, so work on that.
So make sure you figure out what the uncertainty is, because if you find out that there's a high probability of some really bad effect occurring, you might want to rethink your alternative.
Yeah, now, you know, politically speaking, the political elite often does not do this. They get rewarded in the political process for trying, for symbolically doing something, spending some money, setting up a program or an agency with a certain name on it. There's a lot of symbolism in the political world. The analysts should lean against that. And say,
Well, for
what's
example,
it really going to do?
Take the prison example. Suppose that at one time it seemed like a great solution to the crime problem was 3 strikes and you're out. You go to prison for a long time. But now it turns out we have a lot of people who are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old in prison, enormously expensive to deal with in terms of their health care and other problems. And it's not clear that it's been worth all that money in terms of the amount of crime reduction. And so it seems to me that not a good job was done by analysts in projecting the future, or at least telling people what the future might look like. And we spent a lot of money with maybe not much good benefit.
Yeah. Now, of course, on the other side of this issue, sometimes the only way to find out if something is going to work well is to try it. Mm-hmm. Usually we want to find some way to try it at, you know, less cost and risk, and we want a pilot or demonstration program or testing it in one county or one jurisdiction or one state. You know, there's all kinds of ways to try to hedge your bets.
And there may have been elements of 3 strikes for certain kinds of crimes that were really good ones, because there are some kinds of crimes for which it turns out putting people in prison for a while actually incapacitates them.
Yeah.
They don't commit those crimes, and society is better off. So it's not obvious that you're necessarily going to get to the result we have now, although it seems like some of the people, at least, that we incarcerated, it maybe would have been best not to put them in prison for such a long period of time.
Yeah, all this is true, and it's very hard for people to deal with this.
But it shows you the difficulty of projection, because who could have known?
Who could know?
And we're also now finding that there's feedback effects, that communities that have large numbers of their members going to prison, and these tend to be minority communities in America, that has a feedback effect with people coming back from prison who are negative about the political system, and then those societies actually have sort of a downward spiral with a lack of respect for government, lack of involvement in community life, and that's bad for those groups.
I would like to mention Albert Hirschman here as well, because I was reading some sort of biography, not a biography, but a little magazine write-up of his life. He was an economist who wrote this great article called The Principle of the Hiding Hand. Not the invisible hand of the market, but the hiding hand. And in a sentence or two, his idea was, he was a development economist. Sometimes you start off with a huge investment and a plan that looks great, and then you get, you built a paper pulp mill in East Pakistan years ago with the idea of using the bamboo trees in the neighborhood as a feedstock. And then it turns out that the bamboo feedstock flowers, something does every 50 years. Then you can't use it. And then the wood dies, you can't use it in the pulp mill. So here's this, hugely expensive factory with no feedstock. Aha, but then they did all kinds of things, inventing alternative sources of the feedstock and different ways to process it. And they did all kinds of creative things, which they never would have done. The thing became an enormous success. And so Hirschman's idea is that if you really knew how bad things were going to be, you might not start. But once you do, you also don't realize in the advanced reasoning just how creative you and others can be. And so the hiding hand hides the difficulties so that when it comes time to confront them, you can deal with that.
So projection is very hard. But do you always have to know every possible outcome? Suppose I have somebody who comes to me and says, we want to subsidize a baseball stadium in a given city, and it's going to be so much subsidy, and I have to decide whether I'd provide that subsidy to the baseball stadium. And of course the owners tell me this would be great for the city, and there'll be all of this additional commerce, and we should really build the baseball stadium and give them the money. I don't know what's going to happen. How do I solve that problem?
All hail break-even analysis. You know some things and not others. You probably know about the costs. You can make some reasonable assumptions about ticket prices and the revenue from selling your average ticket. Now the only big uncertainty left is how many people will buy the tickets. Break-even analysis says, if I'm going to break even with this big expenditure of money, what do I have to assume about the number of patrons that are going to buy? That's question one. Question two is, do I really believe that number can be attained? Okay, so break-even analysis.
So if it turns out it's got to be 150,000 people per game, I know I'm in trouble.
You know you're in trouble.
If it's 5,000 people per game, I go
right ahead.
Probably not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea.
Now, in between it gets harder, but at least you've got some roadmap to think about the problem.
Or I'll give you another example with the same problem here. Suppose you say, well, okay, monetarily it doesn't quite break even, but think of the prestige and glory of our city. And so now you can look at it and you say, well, I don't know how much is prestige and glory worth. So you look at the numbers and you can say, well, it should be worth about $1 million a summer to warrant this investment. Do I believe this thing is worth $1 million? Absolutely not. So forget it. Or absolutely yes.
Or absolutely yes. Whatever. But the point is you've got some number to attach to it, and you can think about, is it really worth that?